Dzień za dniem, noc za nocą, nasze życie upływa pod bezkresnym niebem. Marzymy o rzeczach wielkich, ale życzymy sobie rzeczy prostych. Myślami wybiegamy do przodu, ale jesteśmy świadomi, że życie toczy się tu i teraz. Spoglądamy w niebo z dobrego miejsca na ziemi.
Lepiej tak, nie? Niż tam.
Potential investment in West Nusa Tenggara. Why? West Nusa Tenggara is ready to accept visitors and businesses? Fastest growing region in Indonesia. Consistently beats national economic growth in 2014 to 2017. GRDP growth of 25.3%, from Q1 2014 to Q1 2018, the highest among 34 provinces. HDI index's growth of 8.9%, from 2010 to 2017, the highest among 34 provinces. Solid infrastructure. 98% of national road is in solid category. Zainuddin Abdulmajid Airport. Revitalization of Badaz and Bima ports. Gilimas, Lembar Port Development. Dams. Pandandur, Bintang Bono, Rababaka Complex. Surplus of 25 megawatt. Additional 450 megawatt is in development. Strong government support. Online and centralized permit and tracking system. Clear KPIs for investment permit processing. Principal permit, 3 days. Investment permit, 6 days. Capable workforce. Young, vibrant workforce. Workforce size 50% of total population. Low unemployment, 3.32%. Strong university networks. A total of 42 universities across the province. West Nusa Tenggara's diaspora network, national and international. West Nusa Tenggara scholarship for all degrees, currently working with 26 universities in 5 countries around the globe.
Welcome to West Nusa Tenggara in Indonesia. As a governor, I have to make sure that our province is friendly to business community, friendly to investment, so we are so happy that you are interested to come to our province. Thank you very much.
Na program zaprasza sponsor Miasto Toruń.
Dzień dobry.
Dobry, cześć.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry wszystkim.
Dzień dobry.
Halo, halo.
Mamy jeszcze kilka minut. Ja spytam, czy jest może ktoś z organizatorów? Bo ja mam niestety na razie dostęp tylko jako uczestnik, a przydałby mi się jako moderator. Dobra, widzę, że na razie nie ma jeszcze. Poczekamy chwileczkę, może się ktoś zgłosi z organizatorów.
A przepraszam, pytanie organizacyjne, jeśli można. Zapowiadane było, że mamy po angielsku się wypowiadać. Czy brak jedynego zagranicznego uczestnika oznacza zmianę, czy dalej mówimy po angielsku?
Tak, zdecydowaliśmy się, że panel będzie po angielsku.
Czyli dalej tak jest.
Mimo wszystko, tak jak zostało zaplanowane i zapowiedziane.
Dzień dobry, witam serdecznie. Agnieszka Zakościelna z tej strony.
Dobry.
Dzień dobry, ja jestem organizatorem, czy przedstawicielem grona organizatorów. Po prostu musiałam dołączyć w taki sposób, żeby móc odblokować audio.
Super. Pani Agnieszko, czy byłoby możliwe przydzielenie mi uprawnień moderacyjnych, żebym mógł udzielać głosu uczestnikom?
Oczywiście. Proszę tylko dać mi chwilę, dobrze?
Mhm.
Panie Arturze,
Mhm.
wydaje mi się, będę próbowała również się dodzwonić tutaj do naszej obsługi technicznej, natomiast myślę, że na teraz po prostu możemy sobie poradzić w ten sposób, że jakby pan mógł po prostu wskazywać osoby, które mogą zabrać głos, dobrze? Bo tutaj jest opcja raise a hand i w ten sposób możemy też wypróbować. Ma pan informację dotyczącą osoby, która chciałaby zabrać głos?
Dzień dobry Państwu, Zbigniew Krowski z obsługi technicznej. Ja może wytłumaczę. Każdy z Państwa ma uprawnienia panelisty, więc każdy z Państwa może być prowadzącym to wydarzenie. Kamera wybiera tego, który po prostu w tym momencie się odzywa. Także nie trzeba podnosić rączki, wystarczy, że widziałem Pan Artur chciał być prowadzącym, to Pan Artur zapowiada następny minut. Tak to się odbywało i to działa.
Wie pan co, czasem się zdarza taka sytuacja, że ktoś ma włączony mikrofon i wtedy się przydaje wyłączyć go z poziomu administracyjnego, bo to jest szybkie i wygodne.
To znaczy można zawsze zrobić coś takiego, że jeśli będzie taki problem, to ja wyłączę dźwięk albo ustawię Pana jako użytkownika wiodącego, tylko wtedy jak ktoś będzie chciał zabrać głos, ja będę musiał wyłączyć ten spotlight.
Poza tym nie wiem jak inni paneliści, ale ja na przykład w chwili obecnej mam takie ustawienia, że nie mam tej opcji raise a hand na dole.
Ale to chyba nie jest najważniejsze, tak mi się wydaje, wie pan?
Wie pan co, ja mam ją w pasku bocznym, opcję Raise a Hand.
No dobrze, ale może będziemy sobie musieli w takim razie poradzić bez tego. Nie wiem, może zapytam Państwa, czy Państwo macie tę opcję Raise a Hand? Macie taką możliwość?
Jako paneliści nie mamy, to jest tylko jako uczestnik taka opcja występowała, ale jak tylko zostały nowe uprawnienia, to już zniknęło.
Okej, rozumiem. Dobrze, no to będziemy sobie musieli radzić bez tego. Okay, it's now 3 minutes past 10:30 and I think we could start our panel. Welcome to everybody, welcome to our panelists, welcome to our participants. My name is Artur Wieczorek, I will be moderating this debate. I'm a member of the programming board of the Polish Forum of Young Diplomats, and I'm representing the Polish Forum of Young Diplomats, an association that has organized this panel. And among other things, the program of the NATO Youth Delegate. I'll now introduce our panelists. And with me in alphabetic order are Krzysztof Iwanek, PhD, head of the Asia Research Center at World Studies University.
Good morning, everyone.
Paweł Paszak, MA, director of the Indo-Pacific program at the Institute of New Europe.
Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Marcin Przychodniak, PhD, China analyst in Asia Pacific program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs.
Morning, thank you very much for invitation.
Tomasz Szymura, PhD, Security and Defense Program Director at Kazimierz Pułaski Foundation.
Pleasure, sir.
And Filip Walczak, MA, NATO Youth Delegate, Poland.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for this event.
Our last panelist, Jason Warlach, could not join us today. Nevertheless, the panel will be held in English as announced previously. The topic we would like to talk about today, or maybe before the topic, I'm gonna say what are the rules for the debate. I'm gonna ask as an opening round, one question to each panelist. I would like the answer to this question to be no longer than 4 minutes. So this is just an introductory question to get us going, to ground us in the discussion topic today. And if other panelists have direct points, would like to respond, please raise your hand or write in a chat. I would like directly respond to that. And you will have no more than 1 minute for a direct response, or you can either ask a question to a panelist or add something to what he said. So 4 minutes for the answer to the question and 1 minute for the direct response if there is one. These are the rules for the panelists. For other participants, if you also have a question, we really very much encourage you to ask so. But do so by writing the question in a chat. And after the first round of the questions, we will have time for you to ask your questions. So first, ask them in a chat, so we already see the question and we know what it's gonna be about. Then you can ask a question and the panelist that already knows that has the best answer to the question can answer. You can, of course, also directly ask questions to the participants. Is this all clear? Okay, great. So if you want to ask a question, a direct point is best to type something, for example, me in a chat, so that I'm sure I'm not gonna miss it. And then we're gonna have a queue of questions to direct points. Okay, and I would like to direct my first question to Filip Walczak, NATO Youth Delegate, Poland. At the beginning of our discussion, it would be good to start to set a frame of what is the NATO and what is the current role of the NATO. Do you think that in current world, in the current geostrategic, economic situation, NATO has still a vital role to play. What is the core purpose of the NATO at the moment, and how do you see its development in the future, Philip?
Thank you very much. That is a fantastic question for the beginning, because we still like to perceive NATO first and foremost as a military alliance aimed at countering Russia's influence in Europe, as it was established in 1940s. But today the roles have changed, the global map of powers have changed. And I think today NATO has still a lot to do as first of all, as the biggest defense forum available in the world, where we can gather not only NATO members, but also players from all around the globe, our partners in Asia, our partners in other parts of the world. And we can engage in a dialogue, exchange ideas and experiences in terms of defense. This is also an important tool to promote human rights, to promote peace and peaceful solutions among nations. But also, NATO still acts for the purpose of defense of both America and Europe. For this purpose, we still have a lot of both military and political assets. We also have critic management. So we have a lot of tools that allow us to react to all kinds of threats, be it energetic threats, hybrid threats, conventional threats. So the role of NATO as a military alliance and its defense role is still prevailing, but also it's good to see that NATO throughout the 30 years without the Soviet Union, without our favorite enemy, let's say, we still have new objectives to find, and we still are able to develop new ideas and new tools to counter the modern threats. So NATO is still a very much alive thing. We are not brain dead, as some would suggest, and I think it's a good time for NATO to really show up in a global scene, because I think in Europe it's largely a forgotten organization. It's overwhelmed by European organizations such as OSCE or the EU, but it still has a big role to play, and it has capabilities that neither the European Union nor any other international organization has to offer, both to NATO and both to our partners, our bilateral partners such as Japan, Australia, or South Korea, and to partners that are allied with us in a Partnership for Peace program. So I believe that NATO still has a lot to offer, and NATO is still one of the most important players, especially if you consider that taken together, NATO is probably the strongest military power in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the recent years, we have seen the shift of US geostrategic interests from Atlantic to Pacific. And it seems nobody is willing to take up the void left in NATO by the US, focusing more on the Pacific region. My next question is to Dr. Tomasz Szymura. For Poland, NATO is crucial. Do you think in this situation with the US pivot to the Asia, what is the future of the NATO and the Euro-Atlantic relationships and how it's gonna develop? Turn on your microphone.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, sure. It's absolutely right question. Yes, absolutely. Right now we are in the very hot period in U.S. domestic policy. We are just ahead of U.S. the presidential election, which are at the beginning of November. But basically, I think that U.S. foreign policy, regardless of the election, and it will be leading by Democratic administration or Republican one, it's quite stable. And U.S. clearly describe its priorities in national security strategy. That's first and the biggest national security threat or challenge, it's China. Second one is Russia. Third one, there are role states as Iran, North Korea, and so on and so forth. So for regardless of the result of the election in the US, the pivot to Asia, as you described, which was Obama administration term basically, but nevertheless, there is a lot of continuation in Trump administration right now. This direction is quite clear, and it's the reason why right now Trump's administration, and also I'm quite sure that there will be also continuation in the Biden administration if elected, that NATO and European allies should also do more when it comes to stability in Asia. So I think that there will be some change in some priorities of new administration, but this Asian dimension will be very, 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 very important. It's not like it's that new concept when it comes to NATO. We remember NATO. We remember the beginning of this century against the background of operation in Afghanistan and Iraq. That there was first of all, there was a famous term that NATO should be out of area or it will be out of business. Yeah, and there was a concept to change NATO into kind of toolbox, a group of the countries and group of capabilities which can be used to conduct some kinds of operation in the region when it's necessary. So from the Polish point of view, as you asked, of course, it's not like good attitude. We prefer NATO concentrate on collective security, on collective defense, with a priority to deter Russia on the eastern flank. But nevertheless, it seems to be inevitable that European allies of the United States will be pressed somehow by US administration to also be more present in Pacific region, which also meet with response from some European allies as France or UK, which declared to increase in presence and, for example, South China Sea. So I think there will be expectation of such kind of engagement of European allies in the Pacific region, and I think that we should really care about it, because it will be top US priority right now.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Now I would like to ask about the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, which is a loose military alliance of US and its allies in the Pacific. Do you see its rise in prominence in the recent years, and do you think that it can rival or replace NATO, or it will be supplementing NATO, or is there a possibility for cooperation maybe? What are your views on that? And maybe I will direct this question to Paweł Paszak.
Welcome everyone. Thanks again for staging this event and providing us opportunity to interchange our perspectives. When it comes to Quad, well, I think at first it is worth emphasizing that it is not alliance. It is what it is, which is Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. It is mostly a loose framework. So calling this format a new NATO or Asian NATO is premature at best, and at this point, it is unjustified. So if we look at the development of this format, I mean this meeting in 2007 on the sidelines of ASEAN Regional Forum, we see that it started as an official way to change, to kind of discuss some security issues, but it died out very soon. And the reason why the first attempt to form Quad, well, it failed. It was that at that point, I mean, in 2007, in 2008, there was no kind of consensus on China. When we look at Australia, we've got Kevin Rudd's administration, Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister, who focused primarily on increasing economic cooperation with China and elevating trade exchange and capitalizing on vast Australia's resources, right? And if we look at India, probably Krzysztof will kind of explore this notion a bit more. But we are still at the end of global war on terror. So Pakistan is non-ally major partner. India's relations with the United States are improving, but they are far from the point they are now, and the tradition of strategic autonomy is still very strong. So at that point, it was pretty much impossible to move beyond this kind of dialogue, unofficial meetings, right? And the Quad, well, it regained momentum in 2017, but during these 10 years, the strategic conditions changed remarkably. The first thing is we've got Donald Trump. We've got Donald Trump, so there is this hardline approach. If you look at Obama's presidency, well, he pivoted to Asia, but he was more about multilateralism and to an extent accommodating China. The second thing is that in Australia, we've got a new prime minister. I mean, Scott Morrison, he became a prime minister in 2018, but the strategic reorientation of Australia's defense policy started in 2016. So there is this kind of departure from this accommodating approach of Kevin Rudd, and we have this kind of reorientation towards stronger cooperation with the United States and harder approach towards China. And I think the third factor, which has to be also included, is, well, the elevation of relations between the United States and India. During these 10 years, they improved significantly, and that's one of the greatest successes of Barack Obama's administrations, and Donald Trump's continued this trend. So obviously, Quad gains momentum, and during this year, I mean, during the pandemic, we can see a real development of this format. And the main factor is, of course, the conflict, maybe not conflict, but the skirmishes in the Eastern Ladakh, and this kind of change in the mood in India. Also there is an important factor of China's greater activity in the Eastern Indian Ocean, which is considered by India as its exclusive sphere of influence. We've got also Belt and Road Initiative and rising China's involvement in infrastructure projects in South and Southeast Asia, which is also considered by India as its strategic sphere of influence. So there is a complex interplay of factors which enabled the development of the Quad format since 2017. But I will kind of repeat my initial hypothesis. We shouldn't call Quad the new NATO, right? NATO is all about unified command structure, about nuclear deterrence, about Article 5. It is about also, about geographical proximity. Just look at the map of the Indo-Pacific and look at the map of Europe, right? Some things are possible in Europe and some things are not possible in Quad. So my prediction will be that in the coming years, unless we see a regular conflict, we will see an increased logistical cooperation, increased intelligence sharing, increased military maneuvers. Maybe India might move to participate in freedom of navigation operations, but only under the conditions that there will be escalation of tensions with China, for example, in the Eastern Indian Ocean and in the Himalayan region. So that's that's this kind of initial introduction from me. Thank you very much for this question. I'm looking forward to hearing what Dr. Iwanek has to say about this topic. Thank you.
Great, and thank you very much for such a comprehensive introduction, and thank you for touching on the subject of China. So now I will hand to Dr. Krzysztof Iwanek, who was already called on, to ask what is your perspective on Quad, and how do you see India's role in it?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Paweł Paszak helped me a lot with his reply, in the sense that I am now in a comfortable position of just having to elaborate on what he said, because I really completely agree with what my predecessor said. Well, yes, certainly Quad is not an alliance. It's a format of defense cooperation which has so far a very limited applicability and capacity. So there is no way of comparing Quad to NATO. It's not an equivalent by any standard. And I would say, as of now, the Quad has also no capacity to deter China in Asia by itself. If you would consider Quad alone as an entity that could deter China. I would point out that so far Quad is mostly two forms of cooperation, which is interactions between military officers on all four sides and naval exercises. So I would treat them as a statement of intent that these four countries, Australia, India, Japan, and the US, as Mr. Paszak said, well, they are openly saying that they want to deter China, but Quad shows that they want to deter. It does not in itself build their capacities in any substantial way. For instance, the news that made headlines a few days ago was that India has finally accepted Australia's participation in the Malabar naval exercises, which means that finally, when these naval exercises will be held in India, all four Quad members will take part in it. But then again, you know, there is a very limited role which multilateral naval exercises can play in building capabilities. So I would say we should look at Quad as only a beginning of cooperation, which will only matter if its members will strive to build each other's military capabilities in more concrete ways. I would give you one example of this maybe already happening. There is a bill, not a law yet, but a bill in the US that considers that Washington should start training pilots of Australia, Japan, and India on the Guam Island. So, you know, the Americans training Australian and Japanese pilots is hardly something new. But for the Americans to train Indian Air Force pilots, well, that would be something new. So I think these are the processes which we should really follow. I mean, apart from the US selling a lot of military equipment right now to India, if things like intelligence sharing and things like training start within Quad, which is feasible, which is possible, then Quad will start to matter something. For now, it's only a statement of intent.
Thank you very much. And I will already have a short follow-up question to any of you, whoever feels willing to answer this question. Do you see, if you were to predict, what do you think in the future? Will it rise prominence, or will it gonna stay on this level of loose dialogue, or is it rather going to decline? I'm asking about Quad, of course.
Okay, so maybe me. I think that all depends on the China attitude towards its neighbors. So if China will continue its approach, its policy, quite assertive, sometimes aggressive towards the South Asia Sea issues towards its neighbors. There will be probably more and more military logistic cooperation, as my colleagues mentioned, which maybe with time passing can turn Quad into some kind of military alliance, NATO-like. But if China rather will manage the problem of its rise of its power and will behave as responsible stakeholders. It is expected from, for example, United States. Probably it will stay on the level as it is right now. So I think that everything depends on China approach.
Okay, great. Thank you for this direct response. And that brings us to our last question that I will ask to Dr. Marcin Przychodnia. How do you think the China views the NATO and how important part does it play in EU-China relationship? What do you think is the Beijing's perspective on the alliance, if there is any?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Chinese perspective on NATO is rather, it's not so complicated, mainly because NATO is being perceived as a US. I mean, it actually almost equals United States, and so because of that, I mean, it also equals the stage of rivalry between US and China. I mean, NATO goes into this rivalry with all the baggage. But of course, the perspective is changing within the last year, this year, with the debate in NATO on China, which started because of the US policy, but not only because of that. And Chinese still are observing this discussion between the US and European allies, and the differences in the perspectives on how much money Europe should spend on NATO, and is it enough or not? And in that sense, it's just China is kind of trying to use this differences in order to somehow convince the European Union, or at least some of the member states, to actually cooperate more with Chinese than with Americans. It uses another example or another argument that is actually cooperation with China is something which should be considered more than the usual transatlantic relations. Here comes the issue of France, for example, when this whole idea is presented by President Macron on the strategic autonomy of European Union and the brain death of NATO. This quotations were highly responded in China, and Chinese experts, and it is very much present in the Chinese debate as a good example of how Europe should actually construct its policy, and what is in a way that what is better for EU or what is better for Europe in comparison to its transatlantic relations and NATO specifically. So of course, I mean, China is observing the discussion on China in NATO, but it's not actually treating it as something which could highly influence the current situation. I mean, the declarations which NATO is making on China are being observed as not very serious in a way. These are not decisions. These are not anyway changes in the policy. These are mainly declarations. And then in that sense, China is kind of trying to still maneuver and use the differences between European states, mainly France, and US when NATO is considered.
Okay, thank you very much. This was the first round of our questions. And I would like to ask first the participants, do you have any questions to ask, direct questions or not? And of course, I also encourage panelists to ask direct questions to each other, or maybe you have a follow-up to something what has already been said. There was an interesting thought that you would like to respond on. We would very much like this debate to be a dialogue when we exchange views or ideas. So you're very welcome to follow up on them. I'm going to give you 1 minute now to think of a question, and if there's none, we're going to proceed with the next questions from me.
I have a question to Filip Walczak. Well, I have a question to Filip Walczak because he kind of explored the topic of NATO's relevance to the future of Europe or to the security architecture. Well, I agree with the relevance of NATO, but as I am concentrating my research on China, I wonder Philip, how do you see the ways on NATO adapting to China's challenge? Because right now we kind of agree that the strategic interest of the United States has shifted from Europe and Russia to China and the Indo-Pacific, and NATO is kind of in between. It's still relevant, but it has to adapt to the country which military budget is over half of all military budget. Is the only credible force that can deter the Russian aggression in the eastern flank. So from my perspective, NATO can be relevant as long as we adapt it to the new challenges, China challenge, of course, but also the cyber challenge and the other emerging challenges. In your opinion, what NATO should do and how it could adapt to the United States strategy to remain relevant?
Thank you very much for the question, for the excellent question. I think the most important role for the European partners in a potential American-Chinese conflict and American-Chinese tensions would actually be first and foremost to take care of our own neighborhood and to release the US of its obligations in Europe, because we know that the US remains pretty much on par with China in terms of military potential and military powers. But if we think that the US has to split its military powers both in Asia, where it has the Pacific Fleet, on the Atlantic Fleet, and in the units operating in Europe, then the US actually loses a lot of resources on defending its European partners. And the best thing we can do to actually support the US in Asia is to drop our traditional thinking that NATO is in general an alliance in which we are all counting on the US to save us, because that's the thinking that is actually still prevalent in many public views. I think it's very much an ongoing point of view in Poland, for example. And I think the very first thing that NATO would have to do to help the US and to actually make a change in Asia would be to take the defense of Europe in its own hands. Also, I think that even though we still perceive the US as the main military power in NATO, I still think that within the NATO and based on the Article 5 of NATO, the other armed forces within NATO has a lot to offer to the US in terms of purely military support. Think, for example, about our naval capabilities, about European aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines, which could still be used worldwide. So NATO, based on Article 5, actually would have to participate in any kind of tension or conflict in Asia. That would be a big challenge to the Article 5 of NATO, because, as I said, we have this notion that the US is here to save us, and we are openly discussing if anything happens to the Baltic states or to Poland with regards to Russian threats. Are we able to, can we count on the US based on Article 5? And we have to reverse this question in terms of Asia. Can the US count on us in this aspect? Because we also have a lot to offer to the US. We also can support each other within this alliance, and I think as a military power, the NATO is still relevant as a kind of addition to the US. We will never bear the main burden of the conflict in Asia. We are not capable of doing this because we don't have the same capabilities of deploying our forces worldwide as the US do. But we still have a lot to help them both in conventional matters as well as in matters of cybersecurity and hybrid threats, because NATO is still also a big hub where we collect the national experiences. We gathered a lot of experiences during fights in Ukraine, during the campaigns against the Islamic State. And those fights were fought not only by America and its Asian parties. So, simply speaking, NATO has a lot of know-how to offer to Asia, both to the US and our Asian partners. So as a know-how hub, the NATO is also a very important factor in any kind of tension or conflict in Asia. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Gunnar.
Thank you, Philip, for your answer. I would agree with you, except one point about the use of European Navy in the Pacific, which I find hardly feasible. I know that France and UK, they have some capabilities, but probably they would be more obvious in Europe than in the Pacific. So that's thank you very much.
Let me just clarify, because I know I was not really clear in this point. I don't necessarily think that we would have to employ the European navies in South China Sea, for example. But if you think that there would be an ongoing conflict between the US and China, then it would also be profitable for the European navies to take care of security of naval of trade routes in the Atlantic. Because as I remember, like 2 weeks ago, there was a speech of the British First Sea Lord, which warned that China poses an actual direct naval threat to the United Kingdom. Because of melting ice caps in the Arctic, the naval routes through the Arctic Sea are more easily accessible. And in case of any conflict, we may expect that the Chinese Navy, the People's Liberation Navy, will use those Arctic routes to move to the Atlantic. And we actually may expect some threats to occur directly in the Atlantic, which is not only an Asian problem, but also it will be a threat to the European navies and to the European merchant navies. And so we don't necessarily have to operate in Asia. We can operate in our littoral waters. We can operate in the Atlantic, and this would already be a huge help to the US.
I want to ask a question. Is that possible?
Yes, very much amazing. Please write it down in a chat, and then after Tomasz answers, we're gonna give you
how do I write it in the chat? I'm not familiar. Oh, here. So I write my questions, or do I have several questions? Okay, I shall write my questions now. Thank you.
Tomasz, you had a direct point.
Yeah, just short one. So let me add only that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the UK declared that its first aircraft carrier, it will be operational very soon, will be permanently deployed to Indo-Pacific region. As you probably consider how important this capability and UK portfolio is, it shows how important this Indo-Pacific region is in UK doctrine. So just short observation.
Thank you. I'm really happy that we touched upon several subjects. And we brought us to another issue I would like to ask. This is an open question to whoever would like to answer it. If a conflict breaks out in the Asia-Pacific region, do you think what NATO's response would be or should be in such situation? We already touched a little bit on it, but maybe some of you would like to follow up.
So no one is trying to answer this question, so I will try to make my attempt. Well, I think what we should do is to do everything to prevent that conflict and to maintain the advantage of the West. As Philip and Tomasz, they kind of briefly draw like a kind of a plan to maintain the relevance of NATO. I would add that maybe not only NATO, but generally the EU, NATO, and all like the democratic developed countries should move beyond the military dimension. I mean, if you want to, for example, ensure that China, China is accommodated, but not in the sense that we want to employ a soft sense of China, but in a way that China's threat is accommodated. I would say that we should focus on maintaining the technological advantage of the West, of the United States, and the so-minded countries. And by that, I mean, we should also increase our engagement in international institutions, especially those who deal with the standardization of technology. We should also, there are already those transnational initiatives aimed at creating this kind of digital democratic economies. Because if China continues to rise, we like it or not, the risk of a conflict, over Taiwan or over South China Sea will rise consequently. Right now, I would say that the risk of a conflict, there is always a risk of a conflict in the Indo-Pacific right now. But I would say that this is still very low. And but as we move closer to the 2050 and to this objective of the People's Liberation Army of achieving a world-class status, that then it will become, well, real dangerous. And our goal should be actually to impede the growth of China in the global value chains, which will have a very direct implication also for the strategic environment, because as we see, Xi Jinping is putting great emphasis on this civilian military integration. So the technological transformation of China is directly impacting the process of modernization and building up the People's Liberation Army. So at this point, which I think we as Europe should focus primarily on this kind of international and technological and economic dimension, and we should focus, because we don't have this power projection capabilities to directly except Great Britain and France. We don't have that capabilities. But what we can do is to try to maintain this economic advantage, because economic growth will drive China's military growth. And if we focus on that, if we focus on this maintaining technological comparative advantage, that's where we can directly help the United States. And we can also contribute to the regional security architecture in the Indo-Pacific, therefore decreasing the risk of a conflict.
Okay, and if there are no direct points to this issue, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Agnieszka Koderk to ask her question.
Well, I have sent them, so I should ask them now.
Yes, yes, please.
Okay.
You're very much welcome.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the Article 5 of NATO is about self-defense. So that really is when somebody, well, let's say China attacks, like Japan did in the Second World War, attacks the territory of the United States. The United States doesn't have really territories in Asia. It's in North America, as we know. So if the United States decides to, for example, wage a war over Taiwan with China, why would that be anything of interest to other NATO members? I mean, just because we are friends with America, should we follow them in all their military escapades? That's number one, because that's not really what self-defense is about. Otherwise, you can extend it to really so many other areas that it becomes a surrealistic concept. The second question is, I often, because I'm a sinologist, when I speak with the Chinese, they argue that because China, in fact, is not a great friend of Russia's. We know that Russia has taken in the mid-19th century a big portion of China, which China didn't forget and still is hoping to recover one day. And so I think their relationship is more strategic and kind of forced by current situation than by maybe the natural tendency to love each other. And therefore, the argument of China goes that if they have economic interest through this one belt, one road idea of Xi Jinping, that they would have an economic interest, which is a strong motivator, as we know, war start over money, to keep the peace in the region. So in effect, they could become a guarantor of our region, including Poland. That's one of the arguments. They're saying, why are we stuck with the United States, who actually right now are looking completely elsewhere, while they could be the so-called let's say a muselier on Russia. So I would like to have your intake on that.
Thank you. Very interesting question. I first give the floor to Krzysztof Iwanek and then to Marcin Przychodniak.
Very briefly, I'll only very briefly reply to the first sentence raised here about U.S. territory in Asia. Well, U.S. does have a territory in Asia. The Guam Island is a U.S. territory, which is much closer to China than to U.S. territory, and to the main U.S. territory. And then there is the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, which is a British territory, but where the US has a base because this territory is being leased out by Britain to the US. So I will not go into NATO institutional or legal points here, but technically there are territories either owned or leased by the Americans, which are in Asia, and then therefore and could be used for military purposes. The US has bases in both of these territories. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, yeah, that's a very technical presence. It's still not, I mean, like of course, I mean, the war started over Hawaii, which is also an island and not the mainland territory. So I take this point as valid. Thank you. What about the question?
I will also ask the Marcin Przychodniak to give the answer.
Thank you very much. I have to say I kind of disagree with your presentation on the relations between China and Russia, and especially about the importance of the One Belt, One Road initiatives or Belt and Road initiative.
I'm saying this is the argument they give.
Yeah, I know, but it's the argument they give for foreigners. I mean, this is a propaganda, Chinese propaganda given to the foreigners. It's actually the BRI initiative is a political idea to actually create some kind of cooperation or bubble between like-minded countries with China. And I don't believe Poland is one of them. That's for sure. And if you could actually observe the details and the results from the BRI up to date, there are none much of them for Poland or any European countries. So not going into details with BRI, it's rather a political idea, and right now currently it's rather passé, and it's not very much, even in China, very much said and reminded by Chinese. So
well, I would disagree. I watch a Chinese program, every day. So and Chinese. So I think they are mentioning it, and they have a special program describing the successes of it. And
yes,
I'm not defending it, but I'm just saying that this is, that you have to admit that economic interest is it's a powerful motivator, And
but if you look at the numbers, there are no economic interests in Poland, for example, or Central Europe. Or if you take, I mean, if you look at what's going on in the European Union in general, that's
Italy, for
also
example,
different. So,
Italy is quite, and Serbia is very involved right now with.
but if you could not interrupt me after each sentence, I would be able to give you a clear answer. Then otherwise, it's impossible. So if
Okay,
I
I'm
could
sorry.
ask you for that. So what I find it's quite important in China-Russia relations is that these are quite strong these days, and it's mostly because of what China is actually in a way of undermining the global order, when Russia is quite a good partner in a way to fight the liberal democratic order in the world globally, right? That's the main idea actually in terms of Chinese international policy these days. That's the main topic. It's the main strategy. Of course, it's long term, and what is happening in China-U.S. relations, it kind of influences this strategy, but it's an ongoing long-term strategy to create the world order in a way that China actually sees that, and it's of course been strengthened since Xi Jinping took power. Out of many reasons, I would not go into details right now, but this dichotomy or rivalry between liberal world order, where Poland is a member, of course, and it's very much using it, and it's very much gaining a lot of interest from it, and not only, and with the China-Russia order or normative ideas, that rivalry is kind of actually, I believe, in one of the most important rivalries these days, and so the Russia serves as an important partner in the rivalry with US, but mainly as a supporter of the same kind of thinking about how the world order should be organized, and whether it should be still democratic and liberal, or rather a democracy with Chinese characteristics. Or so that's my answer.
Okay, I'm just gonna jump in quickly. That was a really interesting topic raised. Mr. Agnieszka, if you want, I'm gonna give you 1 more minute to a short answer, and then we move to another question. But I'm really happy that we had this conversation.
Well, I just wanted to say that there's right now in the United States a big scandal about Hunter Biden dealings, including with Russia and including with Biden, all Biden, with China. And I'm just interested, how do you think the potential change in the presidency in the United States could really influence that relationship between the United States and China? Because it's very possible that nominally it can be China can remain the big competitor of the United States, but in true action, after Biden wins, this focus on China, and especially this opposing China, may be a little bit less active in case. I mean, is there a danger of that? Because we are looking at some specific let's say doubts about the potential president of Biden because of his involvement, his son's involvement, let's say, in some strange affairs with main financial interest in both countries, China and Russia.
May I?
Yes, of course. Okay, so it's another question. So we are swiftly jumping to another issue or topic.
Okay, I don't think Biden's presidency will actually change a lot in terms of U.S. policy towards China, because the process of readopting the policy or making it more radical, more demanding towards China, it's actually, it even started before Trump. Where Donald Trump is, his policy is chaotic and very much oriented towards a deal making, which we could even saw in his attitude towards China. but his administration kind of tried and actually managed to make it more reasonable and sustainable and actually efficient in a way, and with clear presence of Mr. Pottinger, his advisor. I believe Donald Trump didn't really wanted to go that far, but in a way that he was much more interested in making deals than actually demanding China to change its policies. But the result was the effect of his administration works. What Biden can do, and I don't think he will stop this trend. And what there are some information about people who can cooperate with him in his administration in terms of foreign affairs. And these people, these names are mostly associated with quite strong and demanding policy towards China. And so in that sense, I don't see much difference. What I can see, and it's nothing new for us dealing with this topic, what is probable that he will actually engage more in cooperation with other partners. And it's not only European Union, but it's also Asian partners, South Korea, Japan, India. So this may be a bit different, but it actually, I think it can help in terms of what by we, I mean Europe and in the US, transatlantic community, that we are expecting from China to change its policy out of quite reasonable and good reasons we have. And Biden, better cooperation can actually help to achieve these goals.
Okay, thank you very much. We also have another question. Is it a direct point, Mr. Paweł Paszak? Direct point?
Yes, I wanted actually to briefly touch upon those two questions by Mariusz Rukat and
Exactly, that's the thing that I wanted to do. My question is if Mr. Mariusz Rukat would like to ask his questions personally. Go ahead. I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. There must be an issue with your microphone. But we can see you.
So maybe I will try to answer this question basing on what I see in the chat. Okay. Well, I think that there are two questions regarding NATO's role in Poland's foreign policy. And I mean, and that relates to this ongoing shift in the US strategy. And my point is that, well, I am not primarily a NATO expert, but from my experience, I see that since 2014, actually the United States and NATO increased its activity on the eastern flank. We see tailored forward presence. We see enhanced forward presence. There is this Szpica NATO, which is VJTF. We've got this new cooperation agreement between Poland and the United States, because I think it comes from the realization. It comes from the realization that, you know, the US military presence on the eastern flank, it's not, you know, altruism. I mean, for example, if you look at dilemmas regarding, for example, 5G, regarding investment agreement with China, well, for Poland and for the eastern flank countries, the reason why we support the United States so much is that they provide this security guarantee. If they stop doing this, well, what stops us from dealing with China? We will do that. We will do that. So US increasing or like maintaining US military presence on the eastern flank, or even expanding it, in my opinion, is also a way to maintain its political power. So it's working both ways. It's not altruism. And regarding this relevance for Poland's security policy, I mean, German stance on Nord Stream 2, French remarks regarding the brain dead of NATO, its strategic dialogue with Russia, shows that the United States is still the only actor really interested and capable of providing security to the region. But I would like to advise to read Justyna Gotkowska's analysis regarding this topic. They are available on the OSW website, and I think she very with great competence explored this topic, and I largely agree with her on this matter. So I hope just slightly I answered your questions.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Yeah, okay. I think that we discuss on this some platform, some level of the problem. That the problem of China rise is the problem that as China rises, also the appetite of China will rise. This is the same question like it was with the United States after the Second World War. The United States created the liberal order also to have the platform, have the field to exist. So the China existence now, we are talking about the population of 1.4 billion of citizens that produce, that eat, that consume, but they want to develop. So the question is that China will fill every vacuum in the world, not on the Western or Eastern or Euro-Asian hemisphere, but it wants to fill every vacuum that it's possible, and this vacuum can be made only with the acceptance of the strongest in the world, the United States, the European powers. The question of the presence of United States on the eastern flank is vital for Poland. Poland doesn't have the capabilities to imagery, the geospatial intelligence. This is the basic now for the military operations. The United States, they have 353 surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence, imagery satellites, and China has 122. Russia only 23, as I remember. So this is the overwhelming power that allows to fill any lack of capabilities on eastern flank if anything happens. I think that it's my personal view, but I already published it somewhere, that Poland is the kind of instrument now to draw Russia away from China. The more we attacked Russia from east, and the more the United States attacks China from the far east, the more probable is that these countries will join in some kind of cooperation against the liberal order, against the interest. I don't think that in the interest of China is to break the existing order that is quite safe for the liberal exchange of goods and culture and so on. So the question for me now is that we do not have choice but to keep the United States engaged on the eastern flank here, where we are, where our vital interests are. But what I'm
gonna ask you to wrap up here.
Okay. The second question, what I give, are the policy priorities of NATO become to be the priorities of the United States? Because it's undoubtable that in the United States there is bipartisan agreement that China is the existential threat. That comes from the 90s, from the beginning of the 21st century. So there is no doubt. I don't have the doubt that Democrats and Republicans will agree that China rise should be slowed down, if not stopped. That's what I think. Yeah. Okay. Please.
Amazing. Would anyone like to quickly respond to that, or would you like to go to the next question?
I can just say one sentence, just because just a short input, because I do think that we should observe and analyze China as not actually a standard equal to US country in a way that it's thinking on the international affairs and in a way of thinking how the relations and cooperation with our partners should be. I just believe that what we can observe right now internally in China, we should say that it's actually a party state, Leninist country, very much oriented towards interests internally important, not externally. So these whole ideas about that it will be taking care about its economic interests in relations with other countries. I'm very much in looking at what's going on internally in China these days. I'm very much skeptical about that.
Thank you. I have to stop this topic here. I'm sorry, but there were really interesting points raised, and I'm really grateful for this intervention. But as the time passes, we would like to move to the second round of our questions. We have discussed China a lot during this conversation, and the focus on China is also put very much in the media debates or the political debates. I would like to bring our attention also to India, and to this I will go to Dr. Krzysztof Iwanek, asking you, what do you think is the perspective of Delhi on NATO specifically?
Thank you. So I would start with a very obvious observation that India is a very large and populous country, which is not really reflected in its military capabilities. But due to these circumstances, New Delhi, and it doesn't matter who rules there, but New Delhi basically does not want to be perceived as allied to any global power. So hence possibly Quad, in the sense that there is no real talk in India of being a part of NATO. I'm leaving aside the fact that Pakistan is a partner country of the NATO. So as long as Pakistan has this status, India would not be interested. But even without this, India is possibly too large and too proud to be officially affiliated to NATO. In New Delhi, Mr. Paweł Paszak already has mentioned this important term. In New Delhi, there is a lot of talk about strategic autonomy. So following our own national interests without being formally, institutionally allied to any other country. So these are circumstances very different from the ones faced by Poland, where we clearly want to be institutionally affiliated to both the European Union and NATO. Then again, however, despite the fact that really most of Indian policymakers, strategists, politicians, they seem certain that they don't want to be allied formally, and they want to be perceived as allied. Yet I would stress that there is a whole scope of forms of cooperation between being formally allied and being completely neutral. And in fact, let's just say it openly, India does cooperate and is in partnership with the United States already, despite not being in NATO. Firstly, and obviously, the US have grown to be a leading country supporting India with the military equipment that is selling to India, and it's kind of it's already on the second place next to Russia, the other main military equipment provider to India. Secondly, there is actually institutionalized, formalized military cooperation between India and the US already, to some extent, of course. In 2016, they have signed the LIMOA agreement, which is a logistics agreement, which means, for instance, that American Navy ships can enter Indian bases for repairs or refuelment. And then there is the COMCASA agreement, which envisages shared military intelligence, and probably already 3 years ago, during the Doklam crisis between India and China, it is believed that the Americans were already sharing their intelligence on the movement on the Chinese in the Himalayas when Indians were in a crisis on the border between Bhutan, India, and China. So, well, I would stress that New Delhi will keep saying that they are not an ally of the US and they don't want to be an ally. The truth, however, is that New Delhi, what it is really doing is calibrating in how much it is cooperating with the US. Possibly what we have on board now is the currently negotiated agreement on sharing geospatial data between US and India. So I think as China rises and as India-China tensions are clearly growing. Mr. Paszak has mentioned those tensions this year, which were bloody and very, politically stressing for New Delhi. I think it is certain that New Delhi will, in the coming years, will build more stronger and institutionalized and formalized forms of military cooperation with Washington. As I mentioned before, on the American side, there is also the idea to train Indian military pilots. There are also a lot of deals in the pipeline where the US could sell more military equipment to India. So I'm certain that this cooperation will grow, even if we will not call it an alliance, and even though it will be outside NATO. Two things, I'll wrap up only with two things here. So there is one platform, one aspect on which it is clear that there is a convergence of interests between Washington and New Delhi, which is deterring China. Two other factors, however, are problematic between India and the US. One is Afghanistan, one is Pakistan, the other is Russia. So the Pakistani factor, in a nutshell, is that the US and Pakistan keep cooperating, mainly because the US needs Pakistan's assistance in Afghanistan. But this cooperation has been shrinking in size. Then the US has gradually, over the last years, ever since Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan, the US has been decreasing its financing for the Pakistani military, especially. And the moment the US military leaves Afghanistan, or most of it leaves Afghanistan, there is hardly any scope for further Washington-Islamabad cooperation, especially that Pakistan is growingly a partner of China. So once this ends, once the US soldiers, or most of them, leave Afghanistan, and hence US-Pakistan cooperation in terms of security ends, there is a scope for greater cooperation between India and the Americans. From Washington's perspective, and I will end with this, from Washington's perspective, however, the problem is that India is on good terms and cooperating with Russia. It keeps still purchasing military equipment from Russia. The case number one is, of course, the S-400 system. So that is hard to predict. I think that security cooperation between India and Russia, despite the S-400 deal, is going down, but there is still a lot of scope for cooperation between India and Russia, and certainly New Delhi does not want to quit on this. So certainly for Washington, this will be a problem. This will be a stumbling block, which will not enable to raise cooperation on the security level with India to some new heights. Yeah, that is all.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know Mr. Filip Walczak has a direct point to that. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, exactly. Some very good points were made by Mr. Ivanek. I just wanted to underline that, as Mr. Ivanek said, India and its cooperation with the US is very pragmatic. it's not based on any kind of warm relations between each other. They just see that they have common goals, and the more Asia push in the Indian Ocean region, the more they explore their concept of string of pearls, which is still very much alive in the Indian defense policy and in Indian politics, because they are still afraid of being encircled with Chinese infrastructure, and both military and civilian. And the more they feel encircled by China, the more it will be viable to actually cooperate not only with the US but with whole NATO. As we said earlier, the British are planning to participate in security in South Asia. The Indian policy on maritime security and on the security of the region is that they want to be present throughout the whole Indian Ocean, from the Strait of Hormuz to almost to Strait of Malacca. So they have really big ambitions, and they really feel that they need a large margin of safety. And if they feel that this margin is violated by China, then I think this will create a big opportunity for India to cooperate with NATO. I think it can be if matter as to someone mentioned earlier. I don't remember who. Please excuse me. But someone mentioned that the more NATO pushes around both China and Russia, it brings those two powers together. And I think the more China will push around India and the US, it will bring us together with India. And of course, it will still remain very pragmatic. I don't see any kind of possibility of future formal relations and formal alliance with India. But I think that in the future, as long as China doesn't change its course in the Indian Ocean, first and foremost, and in relations with Pakistan, then I think that the relations between NATO and India will be only growing, and even the existing financial and military ties with Russia won't really be much of a problem in case of such serious unity of interests. Thank you very much.
And a direct point by Paweł Paszak.
Yes, just two sentences. One sentence is about, India's economy is 5 times smaller than China's, and this year we have seen the data from IMF, which says that China will grow around over 2% and India will shrink over 10%. So I'm very curious how New Delhi will respond to that, because they are still largely interdependent with China, and I think harder line could further dwell this growth, and that might be the case for Dr. Ivanek. I'm very curious how India will play this out. And the second thing is about military alliance. I mean, look at China and Russia. They are not former, allies, but well, we have non-official alliance. So I think that is not an obstacle the lack of formalization is not an obstacle for the enhancement of the US-India cooperation, as my panelists said before me. Thank you.
Should I reply now? Yes. Well, the first was more of a, from Mr. Filip Walczak, was more of a comment than a question, I gather. So I would say that I simply largely agree that certainly there is this process which we see now, which looks exactly like this, that the more there is tension between India and China, and there is certainly, the quicker and the bigger India's cooperation with the West becomes. 2 cases so far, the tensions between India and China were very fresh. That was June 2020. And obviously security cooperation takes time. It takes years to push through those deals, sometimes even dozens of years. So, but there are two cases which would prove this. One is that it is expected that because of those tensions between India and China, that deal to share geospatial data between Washington and New Delhi, it has been quickened. Maybe it will be signed quicker because of those tensions. That's one thing. And the other interesting case is that during those tensions, when the tensions were still ongoing in the Himalayas, New Delhi has asked France to deliver the Rafale jets, which were earlier, well, the contract was signed for India to purchase them, but they were not delivered. And the first batch was delivered by France quicker when the tensions were still hot. So that shows exactly what Mr. Walczak said, that India is kind of being pushed by China involuntarily, for sure, to cooperate more with the US. I mean, India would want to cooperate with West anyway, but would not be forced so much to cooperate on the security level if not for China. Although I would also agree with Mr. Walczak that this is not formal when it comes to NATO. Both of those things, what the US is doing with this deal and with France supporting the Rafale jets, let's just be sure about it. Both of these things happened bilaterally, sorry, and not through NATO. And I might disappoint everyone here if when it comes to Mr. Paszek's question, because it's a question on economy, and I would have to say that I honestly don't know how New Delhi will deal with this. Yes, it's true that it is expected that India's GDP will shrink by 10% due to the pandemic and the lockdown. And I have no idea how India will deal with this because, yes, when it comes to a lot of imports, I mean,
if it's okay that I stop you here, that's a very fair answer.
I don't know how will they deal with it, that's all.
And I really accept this answer. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, we can now go to the summary of the panel and the final round. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to have a final closing statement, anything that you would like to add, relate to other panelists, or to the whole discussion. Maybe try finding one point of something new, interesting, a point, a thought that you are taking from this discussion as a summary for you. So something that was especially interesting or refreshing for you, share it with us. I'm just going to recapitulate quickly what we talked through. We talked about the importance or the role of China as well as India in the international security and the implications this will have on NATO. We were talking about the quadrilateral security dialogue and the fact that it does not really rival NATO or pose a threat to it in the near future. We've been talking about switching a bit from the strictly military defense cooperation to economic cooperation or economic power, and showing that NATO is not only a military alliance, but also to some extent a cultural alliance or an economic alliance or a soft power, perhaps. And we were talking about the technical issues. So how to transfer the technologies or transfer the capacity building and the role of NATO in this. Okay, and I would like to give you the floor for this one final thought that you are taking from this panel discussion to share it with us, whoever wants to share first.
Maybe I can start if it's possible. I mean, if it's summary, I would just like to thank again for the invitation. That's for start. But that was quite interesting discussion in a way that for me, it kind of proved that NATO itself as an organization, especially as a military alliance, does not really serve an important role in the Asia Pacific, especially Asia Pacific region. I mean, mostly because of its treaty limitations, but also because if China is considered, for example, there is not much difference for China in terms of whether it's NATO or whether it's United States. I mean, the rivalry with US, that's the main important topic for Chinese, and NATO serves as a tool, and it's been used in it, but it does not play an important part, especially in the Chinese discourse on Asia, on the situation in Asia. But it does not change the situation in a way that we can in some quite, even in some quite short perspective, we can actually see some kind of military engagement in the region. And I'm a bit pessimistic in terms of first when in terms of what's going on, what can happen. Let's say that what can happen in Taiwan Strait and in relations, and what kind of policy towards Taiwan we are seeing right now from China, and what especially within the last couple of days, when we can clearly see in the Chinese internal propaganda the way of commemorating the Korean War, in a way of showing how it is important, how it is very much needed for soldiers to sacrifice their lives for China in the conflict with US, right, which was the Korean War for Chinese. That's the main topic in the propaganda these days. And when one final sentence, yes, one final sentence. If Biden wins and if he continues the policy towards China with much better cooperation with partners, there might be an attempt from China to actually radicalize its policy towards Taiwan, but maybe also towards India.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Okay, let me jump in. I just wanted to use my time just to clarify one thing, because in the discussion there was kind of stormy discussion, so I haven't chance to do it. I couldn't chance to do it. There was Article 5 mentioned in the context of Guam territory, and please remember that Article 5 clearly say that a collective defense touch the territory of NATO countries in Europe or North America. So and it's basically not coincidence, because when NATO was created, European countries were colonial power. NATO didn't want to be involved in kind of out of area cooperation. But to sum up, basically NATO, it's the priority of NATO should be like collective defense in Europe. It's also like priority for Poland to keep its skirts of the Allies. But nevertheless, we need to be aware that there will be more and more pressure from our American allies that NATO should care also of East Asian and general Pacific region. And there was, by the way, interesting article of Atlantic Council, which was issued a couple of days ago. I disagree with it, because it suggests that NATO can be changed into kind of balancing coalition of China around the world. But there was also some interesting observation that there can be some change of ideas, experience, practices between European allies, between NATO countries and Pacific countries as Australia, Japan, New Zealand, to help them to cooperate more effectively to stabilize the area of Indo-Pacific region. So I see the role of NATO and in this new construction in Indo-Pacific region rather as a change of experience rather as advisory cooperation in the peace making operation stabilization efforts, but not as a tool to balance China somehow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the remaining panelists, if you want to yield your time, it's also okay. If you decide that your the topics that you wanted to cover have been finished. If not, I give you the floor. Philip?
Yes, I would like in the end to thank the organizers and all the panelists once again for this meeting and for the exchange of views. It was really interesting and exciting to hear so many perspectives. And I actually am rather optimistic about the role of NATO in Asia, because we discussed about the role of NATO as a platform of exchange of experiences, but I also think that we can see a lot of spaces where NATO can actually engage, be it in relations with India. If India, as I said earlier, is forced to seek further relations with us, when it comes to safety issues in Asia, which are not clearly political and which are not primarily based in a duel between the US and China, for example, when it comes to safety of navigation and safety and energy safety in the region. So I believe that there is a lot to do for NATO, and I believe that we can still achieve a lot by NATO, and without leaving the European partners of the US alone with Russia. So I think that if we're looking for idea for NATO for the future, for any idea to NATO to re-emerge as a major power to regain its good public relations view, then I think Asia is the key, because that's the region in which NATO can actually do the most at this point. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Would any, yes, Paweł? Would you like?
I would like to join the congratulations. And I will, well, it's very difficult to sum up the discussion with so many topics, but I would like to emphasize, and I will relate to Mariusz Rukac's question about the convergence of the NATO's policy and US policy. And I think right now, well, the winter is coming, you know, brace yourselves. And what should be priority now is to strike a comprehensive security transatlantic deal, because we still struggle with that. Because this dynamics we discuss here, they increasingly show that there is a need for increased transatlantic cooperation. And the sooner we deal with that, I mean, the sooner we overcome these differences, the significant differences between the United States and the EU and the European countries, the better. And the second point I wanted to make is that it also showed that Poland should focus on both on increasing its capabilities and enhancing cooperation with the United States, because right now we are, well, the situation and the direction we go is good, but well, it will, well, we don't have any guarantee that it will remain so. And the same thinking is in South Korea, Australia, India. What happens if the US withdraws, and so on? So, well, yes, so we should, beyond cooperation within the NATO, we should also largely focus on increasing its own capabilities. And I think this idea of 2.5% of GDP on defense is a good direction. And if we also put greater emphasis on increasing its research and development capabilities, that will be perfect. So thank you very much again for providing a framework for exchanging views.
Okay, and to our last panelist, very briefly.
Yeah, well, I already took a lot of everybody's time, so I would guess I would just say thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone for participating and for this lively discussion. I guess for me the main takeaway would be that well, I would agree mainly with Marcin Przechodny that so far it seems it's more US being involved in Asia Pacific and not NATO as such. And apart from those countries that are already within NATO, we don't see so much convergence. Whether it changes, I don't know, but I would say that the main takeaway from me here is that we should not look at such partnerships like those poised to deter China. We should not look at them as in a 0-1 binary way where you either have an alliance or you don't have an alliance with the US. It seems, and Quad seems to be a signal that we may also, that's of course one scenario, that we may be looking at the US building not formalized partnerships that are not called an alliance like NATO, with countries that are outside NATO, but countries that are with India and within Asia and share the Washington's perspective on China. So India is clearly there, but then you may have some countries from, for example, Southeast Asia that may become part of such initiatives. So I think for us as analysts, it would be also important to look at those bilateral or non-alliance level forms of cooperation, which I think will grow in the coming years with the growth of China.
Amazing. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I especially thank you for the opportunity to have the discussion, exchange of opinions. I think it would be very boring if we just each had our statements, and in this panel we had an opportunity to exchange views, talk to each other. So I think in this sense we were very successful. I also thank the participants for asking questions. They were very lively, vivid contributions that also made this debate interesting. And on behalf of Polish Forum of Young Diplomats, I very much thank our panelists for participating, taking the time, accepting our invitation, and being here with us. Thank you, and I hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.